Chapter 6 of 813. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 813 by Maurice Leblanc. Chapter 6. Monsieur Lenormand succumbs. Monsieur Lenormand was back in his room at the Prefecture of Police at 6 o'clock in the evening. He at once sent for Dieuzy. "Is your man here?" "Yes, chief." "How far have you got with him?" "Not very. He won't speak a word. I told him that, by a new regulation, foreigners were obliged to make a declaration at the Prefecture as to the object and the probable length of their stay in Paris, and I brought him here, to your secretary's office. I will question him." But at that moment an office messenger appeared. "There's a lady asking to see you at once, chief." "Have you her card?" "Here, chief." "Mrs. Kesselbach. Show her in." He walked across the room to receive the young widow at the door and begged her to take a seat. She still wore the same disconsolate look, the same appearance of illness and that air of extreme lassitude which revealed the distress of her life. She held out a copy of the Journal and pointed to the line in the agony column which mentioned Steinweg. "Old Steinweg was a friend of my husband's," she said, "and I have no doubt that he knows a good many things." "Dieuzy," said M. Lenormand, "bring the person who is waiting. Your visit, madame, will not have been useless. I will only ask you, when this person enters, not to say a word." The door opened. A man appeared, an old man with white whiskers meeting under his chin and a face furrowed with deep wrinkles, poorly clad and wearing the hunted look of those wretches who roam about the world in search of their daily pittance. He stood on the threshold, blinking his eyelids, stared at M. Lenormand, seemed confused by the silence that greeted him on his entrance, and turned his hat in his hands with embarrassment. But suddenly he appeared stupefied, his eyes opened wide and he stammered: "Mrs. Kesselbach." He had seen the young widow; and, recovering his serenity, smiling, losing his shyness, he went up to her and, in a strong German accent: "Oh, I am glad! At last! I thought I should never. I was so surprised to receive no news down there, no telegrams. And how is our dear Rudolf Kesselbach?" The lady staggered back, as though she had been struck in the face, and at once fell into a chair and began to sob. "What's the matter? Why, what's the matter?" asked Steinweg. M. Lenormand interposed: "I see, sir, that you know nothing about certain events that have taken place recently. Have you been long travelling?" "Yes, 3 months. I had been up to the Rand, then I went back to Cape Town and wrote to Rudolf from there. But on my way home by the East Coast route, I accepted some work at Port Said. Rudolf has had my letter, I suppose?" "He is away. I will explain the reason of his absence. But first there is a point on which we should be glad of some information. It has to do with a person whom you knew and to whom you used to refer, in your intercourse with Mr. Kesselbach, by the name of Pierre Leduc." "Pierre Leduc? What? Who told you?" The old man was utterly taken aback. He spluttered out again: "Who told you? Who disclosed to you?" "Mr. Kesselbach." "Never! It was a secret which I confided to him, and Rudolf keeps his secrets, especially this one." "Nevertheless, it is absolutely necessary that you should reply to our questions. We are at this moment engaged on an inquiry about Pierre Leduc which must come to a head without delay; and you alone can enlighten us, as Mr. Kesselbach is no longer here." "Well, then," cried Steinweg, apparently making up his mind, "what do you want?" "Do you know Pierre Leduc?" "I have never seen him, but I have long been the possessor of a secret which concerns him. Through a number of incidents which I need not relate, and thanks to a series of chances, I ended by acquiring the certainty that the man in whose discovery I was interested was leading a dissolute life in Paris and that he was calling himself Pierre Leduc, which is not his real name." "But does he know his real name himself?" "I presume so." "And you?" "Yes, I know it." "Well, tell it to us." He hesitated, then vehemently: "I can't," he said. "No, I can't." "But why not?" "I have no right to. The whole secret lies there. When I revealed the secret to Rudolf, he attached so much importance to it that he gave me a large sum of money to purchase my silence, and he promised me a fortune, a real fortune, on the day when he should succeed, first, in finding Pierre Leduc, and next, in turning the secret to account." He smiled bitterly: "The large sum of money is already lost. I came to see how my fortune was getting on." "Mr. Kesselbach is dead," said the chief detective. Steinweg gave a bound. "Dead? Is it possible? No, it's a trap. Mrs. Kesselbach, is it true?" She bowed her head. He seemed crushed by this unexpected revelation; and, at the same time, it must have been infinitely painful to him, for he began to cry: "My poor Rudolf! I knew him when he was a little boy. He used to come and play at my house at Augsburg. I was very fond of him." And, calling Mrs. Kesselbach to witness: "And he of me, was he not, Mrs. Kesselbach? He must have told you. His old daddy Steinweg used to call me." M. Lenormand went up to him and, in his clearest voice: "Listen to me," he said. "Mr. Kesselbach died murdered. Come, be calm. Exclamations are of no use. He died murdered, I say, and all the circumstances of the crime prove that the culprit knew about the scheme in question. Was there anything in the nature of that scheme that would enable you to guess?" Steinweg stood dumbfounded. He stammered: "It was my fault. If I had not suggested the thing to him. Mrs. Kesselbach went up to him, entreating him: "Do you think? Have you any idea? Oh, Steinweg, I implore you." "I have no idea. I have not reflected," he muttered. "I must have time to reflect." "Cast about in Mr. Kesselbach's surroundings," said M. Lenormand. "Did nobody take part in your interviews at that time? Was there nobody in whom he himself could have confided?" "No." "Think well." Both the others, Dolores and M. Lenormand, leant toward him, anxiously awaiting his answer. "No," he said. "I don't see." "Think well," repeated the chief detective. "The murderer's Christian name and surname begin with an L and an M." "An L," he echoed. "I don't see. An L. An M." "Yes, the initials are in gold on the corner of a cigarette case belonging to the murderer." "A cigarette case?" asked Steinweg, making an effort of memory. "A gun metal case, and one of the compartments is divided into two spaces, the smaller for cigarette papers, the other for tobacco." "Two spaces. Two spaces," repeated Steinweg, whose thoughts seemed stimulated by that detail. "Couldn't you show it to me?" "Here it is, or rather this is an exact reproduction," said M. Lenormand, giving him a cigarette case. "Eh? What?" said Steinweg, taking the case in his hands. He looked at it with stupid eyes, examined it, turned it over in every direction and, suddenly, gave a cry, the cry of a man struck with a horrible idea. And he stood like that, livid, with trembling hands and wild staring eyes. "Speak, come, speak!" said M. Lenormand. "Oh!" he said, as though blinded with light. "Now all is explained." "Speak, speak!" He walked across to the windows with a tottering step, then returned and, rushing up to the chief detective: "Sir, Rudolf's murderer, I'll tell you. Well. ..." He stopped short. "Well?" There was a moment's pause. Was the name of the odious criminal about to echo through the great silence of the office, between those walls which had heard so many accusations, so many confessions? M. Lenormand felt as if he were on the brink of the unfathomable abyss and as if a voice were mounting up to him. A few seconds more and he would know. "No," muttered Steinweg. "No, I can't." "What's that you say?" cried the chief detective, furiously. "I say that I can't." "But you have no right to be silent. The law requires you to speak." "I will speak to morrow. I must have time to reflect. To morrow I will tell you all that I know about Pierre Leduc, all that I suppose about that cigarette case. To morrow, I promise you." It was obvious that he possessed that sort of obstinacy against which the most energetic efforts are of no avail. M. Lenormand yielded: "Very well, I will give you until to morrow, but I warn you that, if you do not speak to morrow, I shall be obliged to go to the examining magistrate." He rang and, taking Inspector Dieuzy aside, said: "Go with him to his hotel and stay there. I'll send you two men. And mind you keep your eyes about you. Somebody may try to get hold of him." The inspector went off with Steinweg; and M. Lenormand, returning to Mrs. Kesselbach, who had been violently affected by this scene, made his excuses: "Pray accept all my regrets, madame. I can understand how upset you must feel." He questioned her as to the period at which Mr. Kesselbach renewed his relations with old Steinweg.